Hey everybody, it's RJ, your host, and welcome to Hash It Out. In this episode, I'll be speaking with Ryan Douglas of Ryan Douglas Cultivation about striking a balance between cannabis corporations and small, local cannabis businesses and growers. We'll also discuss the prospects of federal cannabis policy reform in the United States, the recipe to entering the cannabis industry and lowering barriers of entry as a startup, and more. Without further ado, let's hash it out. My guest today is the founder of the cannabis business consulting firm, Ryan Douglas Cultivation. Welcome to the show, Ryan Douglas himself. Hello, sir.
Hey, hi RJ, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you, man. Thank you so much for sitting down and taking the time. I'm looking forward to asking you about all you've got going on over at your company, as well as your thoughts on what is happening in the wide world of cannabis here in this country. Certainly a lot to talk about, and so we'll hit on a few things during the course of today's episode. Diving right in, just so that our viewers and our listeners can get a little more background on you, I understand that you worked at the Canadian cannabis company Tweed Inc. as the director of cultivation from 2016 through 2013 through 2016. And before entering the cannabis industry, actually, you spent 15 years as a commercial grower, greenhouse grower for both ornamental and edible crops, which is great. So with that experience, tell me more about what Ryan Douglas Cultivation does and how this whole thing started for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been quite a ride. So I spent the last 5 years as a cultivation consultant, and I specialize in the cannabis industry. So what I do basically is help newly licensed cannabis operators launch their cultivation facility quickly, come to market quickly, and spend less money getting there. And so over the last 5 years, I've had probably 15 different clients internationally, everywhere from Canada, Puerto Rico, Colombia, and Australia. And everyone's kind of in the same boat. They've got a license, they've got the funding, and now it's time to make the thing happen. And that's when they reach out to me.
Right.
So I've been doing that for about 5 years. Prior to that, I directed cultivation for one of the largest licensed producers in Canada. At the time was Tweed, now it's Canopy Growth Corporation. And as you alluded to, my background in training is in traditional horticulture. So I was growing vegetable crops and potted blooming ornamental crops for about a decade and a half before I gave my shot at cultivating cannabis on a commercial scale. So really, for over 2 decades, I've been engulfed in the horticulture industry, and I love it. There's nothing else I would rather do.
Love that. Yeah, I certainly am one. I certainly don't make it out to the earth, but I am the person that loves to, get my hands in the dirt as much as I possibly can. Living in a semi-urban environment, it's mostly a lot of porch gardening. You know what I mean? But I do what I can. I do what I can. I'm curious to ask you. So you mentioned that Ryan Douglas Cultivation, you started about 5 years ago. Was that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So my experience with Tweed or Canopy Growth, we were one of the very first licensed producers in Canada. So in 2013, I think we were probably the 7th. And so I learned a lot during that time. I brought a lot of valuable experience, which really helped the company launch. But after about 3 years, I realized that as cannabis legalization continued to expand and will continue to expand across the globe, there's going to be a lot of companies that are in the position that I was with Tweed in 2013. And so having someone that is experienced with horticulture, someone that's experienced with cannabis in a regulated environment, someone that can really kind of show someone how to walk through the process of designing and launching a cannabis cultivation facility, I knew that would be very valuable. And so I left my job as master grower and then went out on my own as an independent consultant. And that's the kind of work I've been doing for the last few years.
I see. And, over the course of the past 5 years alone, certainly, a lot has changed in terms of, as you said, the worldwide, the global cannabis legalization movement. Over the past just half decade, a lot has changed. In particular, in the United States, we have just recently got the unveiling of the long anticipated federal cannabis descheduling proposal from the U.S. Senate, known for those who may not know as the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act. I'm curious, ever since that bill has been unveiled, has that affected anything going on over at your company? Are you hearing different things from your clients? Are they seeking more information? How has this unveiling of this bill affect you, if at all?
So there's definitely a lot of excitement, but in terms of incoming calls or potential inquiries for work,
Sure.
it's been really strong over the last few years. So I think I think a lot of people see the direction that we're headed. I think there's too much momentum to turn back. I
Mm.
think it's inevitable. Like a lot of things that are highly anticipated, it typically takes longer than we're anticipating or would like. But I don't see things slowing down at all. And there was a lot of interest even before this bill came out. So,
Right.
I'm feeling really positive about the future. I think it's full steam ahead. And my current clients and other groups that I speak with that are potential clients, everyone's really excited, very confident. They're raising a lot of money. And I think the next 5 years are going to be huge in the U.S. I think it is today and will continue to be the biggest cannabis market on the globe.
Certainly, certainly. And speaking of of that market and the sizability of that market here in the United States, I just a few minutes ago you had mentioned that your goal at Ryan Douglas Cultivation is to help companies enter the market quickly and hopefully for less, less money, less, a smaller barrier of entry when it comes to financing and funding. And you know, the um, the corporatization, frankly, of cannabis has certainly been a hot button topic here, particularly for those, like you said, cannabis startups or small and local cannabis businesses out there. There was a memo that was sent last week to members of the U.S. Congress by the Colorado State Attorney General, Phil Weiser. Uh, they had implored the Congress to implement safeguards for small and local cannabis firms from being swallowed up by industries such as big tobacco and other giant corporations, as federal cannabis policy reform moves forward in this country. Um, they had voiced fears that corporations could eat up the sector, again, if precautionary measures aren't implemented, and then also said that guaranteeing that small businesses have the ability to join the cannabis sector is a top responsibility. So, as someone who does consult cannabis startups, what are your thoughts on that? And what are your thoughts on the roles that cannabis startups and smaller cannabis companies play in contrast to these bigger corporations that are now entering the industry?
Yeah, so I have to confess some ignorance in terms of how policy and laws are made
Sure.
and enforced, but the idea, the concept behind it, I think is absolutely important. So I think when we think about recreational cannabis use in the U.S., it's safe to make a parallel to alcohol consumption. So we can't do that when we're kind of speaking about the benefits of medical cannabis because it's a stretch. But now we're talking about adult use recreational cannabis, and it makes sense to use the alcohol industry as a parallel to kind of compare and contrast and see where we're headed.
Sure.
So the risk is, I think, when you have these huge companies come in and try to own the market, is that someday all you can buy in a dispensary is the equivalent of like a Budweiser or a Coors or a Heineken, something where it's very standardized. No matter what state you're in, you're buying the same product, but you've got a big company, and there's not very much diversity in terms of products. So that's what we want to avoid.
Hmm.
But I think for small growers, um, if they concentrate on offering something that's high quality, something that the customer really wants, I don't think we really need to worry about competing against really huge conglomerates. We just need to do what we're doing really well.
Mm.
And so when we circle back to alcohol as an example, you can go to any grocery store, any convenience store, and buy a Budweiser, no problem. But At the same time, you can go to places where there's a lot of craft brewery, a lot of craft beers,
Right.
and you have people like myself that would much rather maybe travel a little bit farther or pay a little bit more to buy something that's unique or limited edition or craft quality or special. And so that's never going to go away. And after decades and decades um, of legal alcohol consumption, right, following prohibition, um, it hasn't boiled down to just one or two or three beer options in the grocery store. We have dozens of options. And so for small growers, when small growers get licensed and they start up and they're concerned about will federal legalization really mean an end to their business, because how can they compete against these huge companies? I don't think they necessarily need to compete or be better. They just need to be different and do what they're doing really well, because small growers will never have the money these big companies have. They're never going to have the distribution channel that these big companies have. But my argument is that you don't need it. Really specialize in what you do it really well, create a lot of demand for the product that you have. And I think that's a success, the key to running a successful cultivation business today and in the next 5 to 7 years as federal legalization plays out in the US.
Wow, yeah, that's a great take. I've been mulling over similar thoughts lately. You know, I think about a state such as Colorado, which is, of course, was one of the first states in the U.S. here to implement recreational cannabis legalization, and they've also done wonders with their craft beer movement. And I have also been noticing parallels in the cannabis space in terms of, you know, as you mentioned, you have perhaps the Budweisers of cannabis, and then you also have the smaller craft growers and producers. So do you see that trend already playing out? And what are your predictions for if that trend will continue to expand, not only here in the United States, but in other places such as Canada, or like you mentioned, where else you're working in, like places such as Puerto Rico and across the globe?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to look to Canada, because cannabis has been legal there federally for a few years, so we can see how things are playing out. So you have a number of large players that are very well funded, and they're the biggest cannabis companies in Canada. But you also have a number of smaller growers that are doing really well because they're focusing on quality. And so as a commercial grower, I know one of the challenges a lot of growers have is maintaining quality as you expand and keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Sure.
So just like I mentioned before, I think smaller growers don't need to worry about being better or competing, just doing what they do really well. So I think that you're going to end up with both. Canada is a perfect example. Alcohol industry is a perfect example. And I think over the next few years in the US, that's how it's going to kind of shake out. Is you're going to have really big companies that try to cater to the general population. And then you're going to have a lot of small growers that do special lots. So limited edition, craft quality. I think there's always going to be an appeal for that. And as the industry grows, more and more states legalize, I think we're simply going to see more and more options for the consumer, which is great.
Yeah, certainly. And I certainly, I hope that there does end up being room for both in this space. Because like you said, it only benefits the consumer to be able to have that wide array of options. And be able to go from, perhaps getting the Budweiser of cannabis at a store to also being able to go to, the craft brewery equivalent of a cannabis, hopefully tasting lounge soon, which is another thing that might be happening here in the United States soon with Nevada working on a bill to open consumption lounges throughout the state. I'm also curious, over the course of your 5 years doing cannabis consulting thus far, what have you noticed are sort of the keys or the recipes to success as a cannabis startup? Again, trying to get into the industry quickly and hopefully not at the highest monetary cost.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, we could spend hours going over that.
Sure.
That's exactly the kind of work I do. That's what I specialize in.
Absolutely.
But an easy way to look at it is what I call the three G's: the grower, the genetics, and the greenhouse. So for companies that are looking to launch a successful cultivation business, we really want to look at the three G's. So the first one, the grower, we really need to, especially for large commercial grows, it's critical that the company hire someone that has experience managing commercial facilities. So not necessarily experience growing lots of cannabis, because given the illegality, that's very tricky to find someone that has been doing that legally for 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Um, but what we can do is actually pull growers from traditional horticulture, which is where I came from. So 80 or 90% of the principles that we use cultivating hydroponic vegetables in a greenhouse or ornamental flowers in a greenhouse, those principles apply directly to cannabis. And so what we want to do is hire a grower that has experience managing a facility, managing a team of people, managing a production plan. And then what we can do is actually fill in their lack of cannabis specific knowledge through subject matter experts, through consultants, through marijuana experts. But oftentimes I find it's easier to hire a skilled grower and teach them about cannabis than it is to hire a cannabis aficionado and teach them how to manage a commercial production facility. It's a huge leap. So the first of the three G's is to find a competent grower. The second is the genetics. So there's no amount of money that we can throw at genetics if it's really mediocre strain. There's no amount of money we can throw at that to make it an outstanding variety. So we want to start with outstanding genetics from the get-go. And so depending on who you're selling to, outstanding has a different definition. But if we look at adult use markets, people are typically looking for a high THC content and a really unique, rich mix of terpenes. So it smells and tastes really flavorful. And so we have a grower that knows how to manage a production facility. We fill that facility with genetics that we know if we can execute the crop, there's going to be high demand for. And then the third is the greenhouse or the indoor facility. So we want to build something that is going to allow us to maintain optimal growing parameters for the plant in terms of temperature, humidity, light, carbon dioxide, airflow, because we're growing something that for a lot of consumers is a medicine, and for the rest of us, it's not a medicine, but we can't wash it prior to consuming it like we could with a fruit or a vegetable.
Right.
So as growers, our hands are tied in terms of the kind of pest control products we can use in order to keep that plant clean and grow the plant as healthy as possible. So if we can't use these products, all we can do is create the environment that's conducive to healthy growth, but not conducive to disease infestation or insect infestation. So 3Gs, the grower, the genetics, and the greenhouse, those are really the biggest keys to launching a successful cultivation. If you can master those three things, everything else is ice cream.
For sure, yeah. The three G's hopefully lead to G's in the bank, for sure. That's what we're hoping for. That's awesome, yeah. So that being said, we're now into September at the release of this podcast, this episode. What are you looking forward to for the last portion of this year and going forward? What have you got over in the works over at Ryan Douglas Cultivation, and what trends are you seeing playing out?
So one, I'm interested to see how that bill progresses and what the response is. Me, like everyone else, we're anxiously awaiting federal legalization. Like I said before, I think it'll happen. Maybe not sooner than later, but we're making progress in that same direction, and I think there's too much momentum to turn back. So we're also reading a lot about new states that are choosing to legalize cannabis either for medicinal use or for adult use.
Sure.
And so again, you just get every few months it sounds like there's a new state that is going to vote for cannabis or is internally deciding to legalize cannabis within the state for use. So from my perspective as a consultant that specializes in new cultivation startups, there's a ton of activity, a lot of business out there, a lot of optimism, and I really don't see things slowing down for the next few years. Like I said before, it's probably the biggest market on the globe, and it'll continue to be so over the next few years.
Yeah, well, I mean, fingers crossed, absolutely, for that federal cannabis policy reform here in this country. It's like you said, it's been a long process, but moving through the legislative process is notoriously a very turtle pace process, and moving. I've said this before, but shifting the direction of a societal frigate is a big task. It's a big, takes a lot of wind to move those sails. But I feel like we have certainly gotten past that point, and like you said, the momentum is there to the point where I don't think we can put it back into the bottle, as it were. It's
Yeah,
an
I
inevitability
totally
at this point. Yeah, please go ahead.
No, you're right. I agree 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Ryan, hey, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you offering your perspective and sharing all that you've got going on over at Ryan Douglas Cultivation. Please keep up the good work. Continues to stay safe out there in the wild world. I continue to hope for your well-being. And again, thank you so much for sharing your time.
Thanks, I appreciate that. For any of your listeners
Yes.
that are interested in learning more about launching a commercial cultivation operation, I've got a couple options for them. One
Yeah,
is
please.
a recently published book called From Seed to Success.
Oh, it came
How
with
to launch
props. Love the props.
a great cannabis
Yeah.
cultivation business in record time.
Cool.
So that's available on Amazon, or you can buy it directly from my website at douglascultivation.com.
Perfect.
On my website also, there is a ton of free information and resources for entrepreneurs that are looking to launch their own business. So we've got everything from a license application, practice permit, so you know what states will be looking for when you apply for licenses. I've got SOP templates, information for growers, information for business owners, so a ton of free information on my resources page on my website. And if you're interested in learning more about commercial cultivation or automation, in October there's the MJ Biz conference in Las Vegas, and I'll be a speaker there. So anyone that hasn't signed up yet, if you contact me through my website, I can offer a special 10% discount off the registration for MJ BizCon in October if you're interested in coming to hear me speak.
Oh, certainly, certainly. Well, I mean, we might run into each other then at that point. I still don't know if I'm gonna actually be there, but it's in the works. It's in the works. But hey, man, that sounds great. And we will leave the link again for your website and all of those resources in the description of this episode down below for our viewers and our listeners out there. And again, Ryan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your perspective.
Thanks, RJ. It was my pleasure.
Absolutely. Ryan Douglas, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. That is it for Hash It Out, and I am your host, RJ Balde. I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace out. Hey, everybody. Thanks for checking out our channel. Click here to watch another episode of Hash It Out. To find more cannabis industry reporting, insider stories, and to stay up to date on the latest trends, make sure to subscribe and keep up with our Trichomes community app. Download it now for free, and we'll see you there.